quote, not only prince and king, but set on such a pinnacle of dignity that we know no superior on earth. Written by King Henry VIII in a letter to William Benet in 1530. Hi, welcome. 3 Points in a Poem. I'm Mary Lawrence Bevington, your host. My first point is just a little bio of King Henry VIII. Born in 1491, coronated in 1509, reigned until 1547. Had children, but not lots. One was particularly famous, his child by his second wife, Anne Boleyn, Queen Anne, was Queen Elizabeth, first Princess Elizabeth, and she was the first of the Elizabeths. And he has come into my consciousness lots in the more recent past, partly because of his grandiosity and the archetypes that lived in him. So, just a couple things about his life. He was really, really athletic, supposedly, and he was quite a jouster, among other things. And he had married Catherine of Aragon from Spain and had married to her for 24 years. And at some point, he has a jousting accident, and it's a pretty big deal. He's armored, or his horse is armored. He falls, the horse's body falls onto him, and he's knocked out for about 2 hours. And it's said that after that time, he was a little bit more grumpy. There are lots of other stories, but let's just go with grumpy for now. And it seems that there was also this inflection point where he's been in this fairly long marriage with Catherine of Aragon. They've also had a daughter, Mary, and he falls in love with Anne Boleyn. And because of his love for Anne Boleyn, he hatches this whole plan essentially to annul his marriage with Queen Catherine. And Pope Clement VII is upset about this, but the king works it out to the point where there's a full reformation, and the Church of England becomes completely separated from the papacy. And prior to that time, the Pope had divine right, meaning the divinity came through the hand of the Pope, or so primarily the Catholics believed. And when this schism happened, the way it gets set up is King Henry VIII then anoints to the point of having the divine right now of the king. So, in other words, in a coronation, when a monarchy is anointed, in this case, and moving forward from King Henry VIII, it is literally as if the divinity is coming through them. And it's a belief. Of course, not everyone buys into it, but given the way that King Henry seemed to be and what seemed to drive him, it was a big part of why he did a lot of the things he did and really was able to have as much power as he had. And many people died by his hand. He essentially, via his people that he made do things for him, committed genocide in a religious manner. If you weren't the right religion, you were out, that kind of thing. And then with his wives, these things happened that were fairly dreadful. Let's just talk about one, because he had six, and we've already talked about Catherine. And I'll bring up Anne Boleyn, Elizabeth I's mother, again. She's perhaps the more famous of his wives, and really, it's kind of funny because he was married to Catherine for 24 years before the annulment and her exile, but 10 years spanned, he had five more wives in those 10 years. And With Anne Boleyn, he fell madly in love, jeweled her, brought her into the Tudor family by marriage. And then at some point, he decides that he wants her dead. And instead of annulling this time to end the marriage, he has her beheaded, which is actually even tricky for me to pronounce, just the way that I'm wired. I'm really sensitive, so it's just a lot. And this is a big part of John Fletcher and Shakespeare's play Henry VIII. It's also a big part of the musical Six, that's all about the six wives, and a big part of the long term, well, not long term, but a few seasons long miniseries, or I guess that'd be regular length series, The Tudors, about this family. So interestingly enough, King Henry VIII dies of obesity. These are theories, so I may not be 100% correct, but the experts do believe that obesity brought on his death at age 55, because also after his jousting accident, he really never went back to athleticism the way that he had. And he also has an injury from that accident that is ulcerated. And these two combine, the obesity and this old injury, essentially to take his life. In that time, it would have been 1547. People didn't live as long as they live now. And so, in some ways, he had a somewhat long life to die at age 55. So, what can we learn from this? I think about it all the time, with so much of the resistance against the executive branch in the United States, with the No Kings protests, and what it means to be a king. In contemporary world, often we see the monarchies in the countries that have them, such as England, Norway, Denmark, these places. The monarchy seems much more like a figurehead. But then we also see someone like the former Prince Andrew, the Andrew formerly known as Prince, who has appeared countless times in the portions of the Epstein files that have been released. He's also been accused by Virginia Giuffre, among others, of wrongful acts against minors. And there's some pretty heinous stories, truly. Right now, some of them are simply allegations, but they seem to be substantiated in a lot of different ways. And I do believe in due process, so I'm not going to personally jump to an exact conclusion, but there's this grandiosity that seems to also still be around in some of these structures that are monarchies still, though they don't have that same kind of push that, say, King Henry VIII's reign had. Now, as a world, we've had an order since World War II up to present time. And because of the President of the United States threats on NATO, for example, and again, I'm just going to give one example, there's many I could say, but particularly against Greenland, it is just alarming right now. It's almost like the same concept of the divine right of the king. Meanwhile, the president is also on his third wife, and there's allegations suggested that he may have had a hand in the fate of his first wife, and also an allegation of something terrible that happened before they were married, for example. So it's an interesting. I'll quote another, even though this is only one quote, but I notice Heather Cox Richardson tends to refer to this time that we're in as a moment. And I find it interesting that she stays with the singular instead of going to the plural and calling it a moment. And my understanding of that is, or the way I make sense of that, is that there are so very many things that are all happening at once. The last thread I'm going to pull into this is that yesterday, February 6th, I'm recording on the 7th of February, 2026, the Olympic Games started in Milan and Cortino. And this is a very interesting thing that happens. There's an anthropology between war and peace and the Olympic Games. The Olympics have figured throughout time in the modern Olympics, which are actually not that old. If you go back to the ancient Olympics, you're going back millennia, but the modern Olympics are more recent. They sometimes can be a placeholder for war. It's in some ways, a neutral ground of competition. And it's certainly a ground where decorum and rules are at play and provide structure. Again, another theme that's really interesting in terms of lawlessness and archetypes within certain people who see themselves as above all. There's nothing above them, going back to the original quote with this video. So, in conclusion, my take is that I'm a theosophist. I see divinity in all things, and there is no one person that has the entirety of God that is above all. I actually also believe in more of a pantheon of gods. I lean in that direction a little bit more in that theosophical sense, in that I see divinity running through all things. I go into nature and see light twinkling on water and the shake of the trees and the call of the robin. And this to me is divinity. And this archetype is very different from the grandiose, very, let's just say, the kind of harsh king, the more demagogue style king. It's more of an archetype of what I believe Plato was trying to write about in the Republic. It's the philosopher king. It's the king that is more like Gautama Buddha, the original Buddha, who is open to all things and being equanimous and really seeing the vibe of namaste. The light inside me sees the light inside you. And with that, I bid you adieu. It really helps me to connect with you. And a little call to action: if you want to bring into your meditation your own sense of your own divinity and perhaps the way divinity shows up in your world, you're more than invited to do so, and feel free also to share. And if you haven't already, I welcome your subscription and I wish you well on your journey. Yours in carrying the light.